Daniel Sterling had not read his son a bedtime story in 4 months, and he told himself it was because of the acquisition, not because every time he opened a book and Noah's finger dropped away from the page in shame, something in his chest closed like a fist. Noah was 8. He was supposed to be reading chapter books by now. Instead, he traced words with his finger and went quiet. And Daniel, who ran a logistics company worth 11 figures and could read a balance sheet the way other men read a stop sign, did not know how to fix the one thing in his house that mattered more than any of it. His wife had died 16 months earlier. An aneurysm, sudden, on a Tuesday, while she was folding laundry in the room down the hall from where Noah was doing homework. Daniel had not been there. He had been in a boardroom in Singapore, and by the time his flight landed, it was over. The house had already learned to be quiet without her in it. Since then, he had hired 3 nannies. The first left after 6 weeks, overwhelmed by the size of the house and the size of the grief in it. The second lasted for months and quit the week Noah's school called about his reading scores, saying, not unkindly, that she wasn't equipped for what the boy needed. The third he had let go himself after finding her scrolling her phone in the kitchen while Noah sat alone at the table, staring at a worksheet he could not finish. He needed someone who could manage a household, keep a routine, get his son fed and dressed and to school and back. That was the job description he gave the agency. Nothing about reading, nothing about grief. He did not think to ask for that, because he did not yet understand that it was the actual. Job, Amara Boateng, arrived on a Monday in early October with a single suitcase and a folder of references that the agency had flagged as unusually strong for someone applying to a private household position. She was 36, with close-cropped hair and a steady, unhurried way of moving through a room like she had already decided nothing in it needed to be feared. She had been a primary school teacher in Kumasi for 9 years before immigrating, and for the 2 years since, she had worked in home care while her teaching credentials sat in a drawer, unrecognized by a licensing board that wanted her to sit. For exams she had neither the money nor the free hours to prepare for. Daniel interviewed her for 11 minutes between calls. He asked about scheduling, meal preparation, whether she could drive, whether she had experience with children who had, he said, gesturing vaguely, some struggles. Amara asked, what kind of struggles? Daniel said Noah was behind in reading, that it was being handled by the school, that it wasn't really relevant to the position. Amara nodded and did not push. She noticed things instead. She noticed the framed photo on the hallway table, turned slightly away from the door of a woman laughing with a baby on her hip. She noticed that when Noah came home from school and saw a stranger in the kitchen, he did not come say hello. He went straight upstairs. Nobody in the house seemed to think that was unusual. She took the job. For the first 2 weeks, she did exactly what was asked. She made dinner. She kept the house running. She got Noah to school on time and picked him up and helped him with homework he mostly refused to do, sitting beside him at the kitchen table while he stared at a worksheet with the particular stillness of a child who has learned that trying and failing in front of someone is worse than not trying at all. She did not correct him. She did not push. She sat with him, and some evenings, that was the entire interaction. And she counted that as fine because she recognized something in the shape of his silence that most adults in his life had missed. On a Thursday in the 3rd week, Noah threw his reading worksheet across the kitchen and said, with the flat, furious clarity children have when they've finally run out of room to hide it, I'm stupid. Everyone else can just do it. Mara did not say, don't say that. She did not say, you're not stupid, sweetheart, the way the second nanny had, in a tone that Noah had learned to hear as pity, which was worse than the insult. She picked the worksheet up off the floor, sat down across from him, and said, show me exactly what happens when you look at that word. She pointed to the word friend. He looked at it. He said the letter swam, that when he tried to read a sentence, by the time he got to the end of it, the beginning had already slid away, like trying to hold water. He had never said this to anyone that clearly before, because no one had asked the question that way. Amara sat very still for a moment. Then she said, I know exactly what that is, and it is not stupid. I need you to hear that from me and believe it, because I am not going to lie to you, ever, about anything, starting now. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness has no rank and grace wears no uniform, please like this video, subscribe to Kindness Tales, and share this with someone who needs to believe in people again today. What Mara recognized was a pattern she had spent years learning to see. First, as a student teacher, observing a specialist in Kumasi who worked with children the rest of the school had given up on, and later as a teacher herself, in a classroom of 41 students with 11 textbooks between them, where she had trained herself to notice the quiet ones, the ones who went still instead of raising their hands, because stillness was so often mistaken for absence when it was actually the loudest kind of struggle in the room. She had learned from a mentor named Mr. Ajay who ran a Saturday literacy clinic out of a church basement for children the public system had no resources for. That dyslexia was not a defect of intelligence, but a difference in how the brain processed the shapes of language. And that the right structured approach, multisensory, sequential, patient could rebuild the bridge that had never quite finished forming, Mr. Ajay used to say. While tracing letters into a tray of sand with a child's finger, we are not teaching him to read. We are teaching him to trust his own mind again. Mara had never forgotten that sentence. She had carried it across an ocean in a folder of credentials nobody here had asked to see. She did not tell Daniel any of this. He had not asked, and she had learned in this house that offering more than what was requested tended to be met with polite disinterest. The particular kind, wealthy grieving, men extend to household staff when their attention is entirely consumed elsewhere. So she did it quietly. Every evening after homework, she and Noah spent 20 minutes at the kitchen table with a tray of fine sand she'd bought herself at a craft store, tracing letters with his finger while he said the sounds aloud, rebuilding the connection one shape at a time. She taught him to break words into syllables he could hold on to instead of letting them dissolve. She used colored overlays on his worksheets, cut from a folder of laminated sheets she kept in her bag, because she had read the research on visual stress and dyslexia and knew which colors tended to help. She never called it a lesson. She called it their thing, and Noah, who had spent a year being quietly ashamed of himself in every room of that house, began, without entirely noticing it happening, to look forward to the 20 minutes. Daniel noticed only the edges of it. He noticed Noah seemed calmer. He noticed the boy had stopped flinching when homework was mentioned. He assumed when he thought about it at all, that time and the school's intervention program were simply working. He was in the middle of closing the largest acquisition of his company's history. 16-hour days, a deal that if it collapsed would cost 400 jobs, and his attention had narrowed to the width of a single door he was trying to walk his company through. He was not, if he was honest with himself in the rare moments he allowed for honesty, paying attention to his own son. He told himself this was temporary. He told himself it was for Noah, ultimately. That all of it was for Noah. He did not examine too closely how thin that reasoning had worn. 7 weeks in, on a Tuesday evening, Daniel came home earlier than expected, the deal having reached a lull while lawyers reviewed language on the other side of the world. The house was quiet. He heard voices in the kitchen and walked toward them without announcing himself, the way you do in your own home. Not expecting to interrupt anything, he stopped in the doorway. Noah was sitting at the kitchen table with a book open in front of him, not a worksheet, an actual book. A chapter book with a dragon on the cover that Daniel recognized because he'd bought it for Noah's birthday 8 months ago, and it had sat untouched on the shelf ever since. Noah was reading aloud, slowly, sounding out a word that tripped him, stopping, breaking it into pieces the way Amara had taught him, trying again, getting it. Amara sat beside him, not looking at the book, looking at Noah. Her whole attention pointed at him like a lamp. Noah finished the sentence. He looked up at Amara instead of down at the shame he usually carried after a hard word, and he grinned and said, "I got it," Amara said. "You got it. Read the next one." Daniel stood in the doorway with his coat still on and did not move. He watched his son read 3 more sentences, stumbling and recovering, stumbling and recovering. Each recovery landing on Noah's face like something physical, like weight coming off. He watched Amara's patience, the total absence of hurry in her, the way she let the silence sit while Noah worked instead of filling it for him. He felt something in his chest that he did not have an immediate name for. And then he did have a name for it, and the name was grief, mixed with something close to relief. Because for the first time in 16 months, he was watching someone in this house do the thing his wife used to do, which was pay attention to his son as if he were the most important person in the room. He said, "From the doorway, how long has he been reading like this?" Both of them turned. Noah's face did the thing a child's face does when caught somewhere between pride and fear of having done something wrong, though he had done nothing wrong at all. Amara stood up. "About 5 weeks," she said. "We started with letter shapes. He's dyslexic, not behind, not slow. His brain reads differently, and once you teach around that, instead of against it, he moves fast. Faster than most children I've worked with, actually." Daniel looked at his son, who was watching him with the particular held stillness of someone waiting to find out whether this was good news or bad. Daniel said, "Read me the next part." Noah looked down at the book. He read for more sentences, haltingly, honestly. No longer performing for an audience, but simply doing the thing. And Daniel crossed the kitchen and sat down in the third chair at the table, still in his coat, and listened the way he had once listened to his wife read to Noah when Noah was 3, before any of this. Before the version of his life where he had let a woman he barely spoke to save the thing he loved most while he was in a boardroom. On another continent, when Noah finished the chapter and went upstairs, buoyant, carrying the book like a trophy, Daniel sat at the table across from Amara for a long moment before he spoke. He said, "You're not just a nanny," she said. "I'm a teacher. I taught for 9 years in Ghana. My credentials don't transfer here without exams. I haven't had the time or money to sit for. So I do this instead." She said it plainly, without bitterness. "The way you state a fact you have made peace with out of necessity rather than acceptance." Daniel was quiet. He thought about the 4 months he hadn't read to his son. He thought about the 3 nannies before her. The interview where he'd asked about scheduling and driving and said, "It's being handled," about the one thing that actually mattered. He thought about his wife, who would have known within a week what Amara had figured out in 3, because she had been the parent who noticed things, and he had been the parent who worked. And he had told himself that division was fine, that it was temporary. Until it had cost his son a year of silent shame that nobody but a stranger with a tray of sand had thought to address. He said, "Why didn't you tell me?" She said, "You hired me to manage a household. You didn't ask for this. I've learned that offering things people haven't asked for in houses like this tends to go nowhere good," said. "That should never have been true here. I'm sorry it was." She didn't answer that directly. She started clearing the table instead, the way she did every evening, competent and unhurried. And Daniel watched her for a moment and understood that an apology, however sincere, was not the thing this moment actually required. He said, "What do you need?" "Not for the job." "For the exams?" "The credentials. Tell me what it would take to get you back in front of a classroom. If that's what you want." She stopped, a plate in her hand, and looked at him with the careful attention of someone checking whether an offer is real or performance. She said, "It's expensive. The exam fees, the prep courses, and I'd need time off to study that I can't currently afford to take." He said, "I can cover the fees. I can restructure your hours so you have the time. And when you're certified, if teaching is what you want, I will make sure you have references that open doors, not just close them," she said, and Noah. He said, "If you're willing, I'd like you to keep working with him regardless, on whatever schedule makes sense once you're teaching again. He trusts you. That's not something I want to disrupt for my convenience." She studied him for a long moment, the same unhurried attention she gave everything, and said then yes. 3 months later, Amara sat for her first certification exam on a Saturday morning. And Daniel took the day off work, the first full weekday he'd taken off in over a year, and spent it with Noah, who read to him from the Dragon Book all the way to the end, out loud. Without stopping once on a word, he couldn't break apart himself. When Amara texted that evening to say she'd passed, Noah asked if they could call her to celebrate, and Daniel, sitting on the couch with his son leaning against his shoulder, said yes and dialed, and listened to his son's voice go bright and unguarded, telling her the good news as if it were his own. 6 months after that, Amara left the household position to teach part-time at a public elementary school 20 minutes away. And 2 afternoons a week she still came by to work with Noah. No longer out of employment, but because she said, "Some things you don't stop doing just because the job ends." Noah was reading 2 grade levels above where he'd started. He no longer went quiet when a book was placed in front of him. He had instead started keeping a list, taped inside his closet door, of every book he'd finished, and he added to it the way other children collect anything worth being proud of. On the evening, Amara left the last of her boxers from the guest room she'd occupied. Daniel found a small tin on the kitchen counter, the fine sand still inside it, and beside it, a note in Noah's handwriting that said, simply, "Thank you for teaching me to trust my brain again." Daniel recognized the phrase. He didn't know where Noah had gotten it. He didn't ask. Some sentences you let stand exactly as they are. If this story moved you, please like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Kindness Tales for more stories of courage, grace, and the small human moments that change everything. And tell us in the comments who in your life quietly taught you to trust yourself again, long after anyone else had given up.